We're privileged to have Mr. Taylor Krauss, a well-renowned documentary filmmaker who has worked with Ken Burns, Lee Novick, Eugene Jarecki, Edith Belzerk, Rob Epstein, Jeffrey Friedman, Abigail Disney, Helen Whitney, Aaron Wolf, and Eve Ensler on films traversing grounds from sexual violence to the gold trade, from World War II to the war on drugs, from Addis to Yonkers. And in 2009, he received the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award. Mr. Krauss is a graduate of Yale University and the founder of Voices of Rwanda, Rwanda's first video archive established to film testimonies of the rescapés of the 1994 genocide against Tutsi. On a personal note, he's been a very good friend who's lived in New York City. He's passionate about survivor issues. This is what he thinks about, what he lives, and we're honored to have him here with us. Mr. Krauss.
Thank you, Tabitha, for calling upon the past today, in spite of the difficulty in doing so. For stepping back into the dark reaches of your memory and losses and lighting our way with your words. For communicating the loss you once endured and what you continue to endure. Sharing your testimony with us is a generous act of trust. And I thank you and the organizing committee for ensuring that the voices of the rescapés are at the center of today, this 19th commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi. What you share and how you have shared not only gives reason for our presence today, but also gives meaning to our presence here. If we are here only to experience the commemoration and not to actively be part of it, which listening and testimony demands, then we have missed the point of commemoration. And if we are not here today to listen to the rescapés and to honor those lost loved ones, then for whom are we here? Your Excellencies, Ambassador James Kimonyo, Clotilde Baranga Gasarabgue, and Cynthia Queta, my fellow Americans, and Rwandan brothers and sisters, and all others who are here with us today. I stand here with a heavy heart, and yet emboldened by the trust of all the rescapés who opened their lives to me and shared their stories with me. I do not speak for them, nor on their behalf, but rather for myself, as a witness to their memories and how they bear them. I speak both as an outsider, but also as a friend, a brother, and a son who has inherited these relationships and a history that was at once not my own, yet has become entwined with my own. A history that has indelibly changed the course of my life and how I understand the world and my role in it. Though listening to the stories of the rescapés for nearly a decade, I have come to understand that for the rescapés, the past does not rest in the past. It is neither buried nor washed away by time, but rather it is a permanent and active fixture of the present. Commemoration is, in a sense, an attempt through memory to bring the past under present scrutiny and to demonstrate its hold on us. A commemoration hosted in Washington, D.C. today demands that we confront both Rwanda's and America's past, simultaneously holding them against each other. And as I listened to our national anthems, I did just that. To do so honestly as an American is to accept and publicly acknowledge our failure to stop the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994, our failure in the interventions of the years that followed, and the failures in which we continue to participate at the present, including our role in harboring genocidaires and our lack of attention to securing international redress for the rescapés. As an American citizen, I sadly own these failures too. Though our window to respond narrows as the years and the rescapés pass away, I have found that commemoration is one way which makes relevant our failures by demanding a personal response to this history. In 2004, I attended my first commemoration, which was held at Amahoro Stadium in Kigali. Though I had previously read and heard testimonies, this was my first confrontation with mass trauma evoked by testimony. As the speakers recounted horrors that had taken place 10 years earlier, several women began to cry out from the stands. Like a contagion, these intermittent cries began to spread, and soon the persistent shrieks of hundreds of women drowned out the speaker. The Red Cross workers descended like an army of ants, carrying away the crying women overhead on stretchers. It was an act of first aid to contain the seizures and flashbacks from spreading across the stadium and to protect the women from becoming spectacles of the press. It was an effective and necessary, and yet it felt harshly clinical, a rapid removal of problem cells, which were in actuality the manifestation of a community's deeply wounded heart. Every April I remember this scene, as it was so unsettling on many levels. With each new rising cry, we, the press, a colony of vulturing photographers, moved en masse towards the next shriek like sports journalists running down the line for a better vantage point. The lines of my own response as fellow human, documentarian, and spectator were blurry. I was 24 years old, and I had no context for what I was witnessing, nor what it meant to document it. And so I followed the seasoned reporters, and I continued filming. After all, I reasoned this is what the press does. Even more critical, I thought, because I was the only American television camera there, a disturbing fact in itself. After 3 months in Rwanda, I returned home to the US, but knew I couldn't walk away. I had witnessed the need of many rescapés to share their stories, and because no space existed outside of commemoration and gacaca for the rescapés to share and record their lives and family legacies, I decided to depart from my role as documentarian and journalist and began filming testimonies and building Voices of Rwanda archive. It was this process that changed me and gave me insight into what I had experienced at that first commemoration in 2004 and the media's depiction of it, the global spectatorship of Rwanda, the sensationalism, the sensationalization and instrumentalization of its past and present, and ultimately of survivor narratives by governments and NGOs, filmmakers and journalists alike. I came to recognize that this was nothing new, that this had more often than not always been how the media depicted Rwanda, even in 1994. Since establishing the archive in 2006, I have learned over and over from the rescapés how essential it is that they establish their own histories and family legacies and transmit them to their children. To withhold their histories would be like denying the genocide, one survivor shared with me. Unless her family history is recorded, she said, when she dies, so too will her family name. Many survivors feel they must speak to their children, but in speaking, they know they are transmitting sadness. And yet at the same time, in withholding their experiences, they also know they are transmitting sadness. This is a paradox that blights their agency with regards to their own history. It is an inescapable aspect of escaping the genocide. Telling, however, is never a solitary endeavor. It requires an audience. And if we as secondary witnesses choose not to hear and see these tellings, we too become guilty of a kind of denial by default. Or worse, as we are warned, in Elie Wiesel's words, to forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time. Over the years, I have witnessed the lives of many of those who shared their testimonies with me and have seen the capacity for resilience and resolve. I've attended weddings and graduation ceremonies and birthday parties and have played with their babies, run in races, and danced in nightclubs together. But through all of these moments of joy and happiness and regular life, even 19 years after, I have never been told and have observed that the past is never far off in their minds. While I do not wish to depict all rescapés as prisoners of the past, as many are not, I would be remiss not to mention today that while we commemorate together for one day, the rescapés do not have the ability simply to turn off their mourning according to the time frame of Ikunamo, the mourning period. Many rescapés who are living at present in Rwanda are challenged to live in the present because many still reside in the same towns in which their ordeals took place and see the perpetrators on a daily basis. Schools, churches, hotels, and stadiums, of which were sites of the killing, often become painful detours into the past. In addition to the hundreds of inzibutso, the memorial sites that dot the countryside, which already stake claim to memory. And even the beautiful landscape, Rwandan Nziza, itself with its banana groves and marshes and valleys and rivers, can entreat reflection into the past, particularly during the rainy season. One April, while eating lunch with a friend in Kigali, it began to rain. At that moment, he turned to me and he said, "I remember the water washing down the blood on this dirt road." Happy memories, too, are often sullied by the overshadowing power of genocidal memories. One woman shares a story in her testimony how she and her friends used to swim frequently in the lake. As she describes the lake as her childhood idyll, the memory of cadavers swallowed by the lake is triggered. As such, even her pre-genocide memories become contaminated by the memory of the genocide. Traumatic memories like these puncture the surface of the present, even when rescapés no longer live in Rwanda. In Canada, one rescapée counted to me the anxiety she has every time she gets off the city bus when she fears someone might be following her. There is a plausible correlation between this fear and her experience during the genocide, when Hutu killers drove her on a bus to an area where she was to be killed. Even if memories of the genocide do not come to mind when she gets off the bus, momentary fear, likely the result of those memories, intervenes in her daily life in Canada. Last year, I attended a wedding of a man whose testimony I filmed. What he wished to be the happiest day of his life was one of the most challenging. His fiancée began crying when she was given away by a man standing in for her father, who had been killed in the genocide. Later, the fiancée said to him, who had also lost her entire family in the genocide, "I will be your mother and your wife." The Rwandan man began to cry at his own wedding. And later, when the photographer unknowingly requested that the parents of the couple join them for the photograph, nobody stepped forward, reminding them of their loss in what was supposed to be a moment of joy. I cannot recount firsthand accounts about what it is like to live with the legacy of genocide on a daily basis, because I have not experienced this, but testimonies can. I cannot tell you what it is like to have a child who will never get to meet his grandparents, or to graduate from college without any relatives to praise one's accomplishment, but testimonies can. I cannot tell you what it feels like to wash and then break the bones of my father to fit them inside a small box for reburial, but I witnessed a young man once tell me this story very lovingly in his testimony. I do not know what it is like to feel ashamed of having been raped during the genocide, but I can tell you how one woman chose to share her story with me, only later to request that it be redacted from her testimony. I cannot tell you what it feels like to have to give a testimony at schools in the US every time they request a speaker. But I can tell you that my friends feel this burden because they are afraid that if they do not speak, others posing as survivors will stand in their place. Video testimony may someday relieve them of this burden. 2 years ago, just before an all-night commemoration vigil, I presented about 1 hour of testimonies to a few hundred survivors and their relatives who had settled in Canada. After the screening, one man stood up, and he told the group that he recognized one of the women on the screen who had shared her testimony. Until that moment, he had believed that she had been killed, and it had been 17 years. He described how he was the best man in her brother's wedding, how he grew up next door to the family, and that he considered her his sister. Months later, when I delivered a letter he had written to the woman, I watched as she wept at the discovery that he was alive. It was testimony that connected them again. The two began a correspondence, and the woman shared with me how proud she felt of her accomplishment of having shared her testimony, which had been a painstaking 8-hour ordeal, and how meaningful it was that it had been received in Canada. I have come to learn that the two-way street of testimony is not simply about the stories. It's not simply about receiving the stories as a listener, but embracing them. And that taking part in this process requires more than being a spectator, as I once was in 2004, but becoming a witness who holds on to these memories.